Hi there, I'm going to share a scripture reflection on today's gospel reading. It's from Mark chapter 10, verse 46 to 52. So feel free to pause the video, have a read, come back to it. This week we've had a lot of people outraged. One of our local senators interrupted the visit of King Charles, challenging the legitimacy of British rulership, calling for treaty, and naming the truth that British colonists removed Aboriginal children from their families and removed ancestral remains from the land. And a lot of people have been angry or embarrassed, saying that she shouldn't have made a fuss while the king was visiting, or saying that she should have raised these grievances politely. In today's gospel reading, we have a similar awkward and embarrassing scene. But first, let's go over what has been going on in Mark's gospel. So Jesus has called some folks to follow him, and they've gone and seen what things are like for people at the edges of their society in rural Galilee, and then they've gone over to the other side of the lake, which has been settled by Greek-speaking, Greek-thinking, pagan foreigners, and they've gone as far as Tyre and Sidon, which is in Lebanon now. It's up the Mediterranean coast. They start off by going to the edges of their world and seeing what life is like for people there. And during that time, people from Jerusalem have been hearing about what Jesus has been up to in the regions. They've been sending people to investigate and question him. Now Jesus has turned around and has set his face towards Jerusalem, to the center of Jewish society that he's part of, and he's begun to head there to confront the rulers. He's heading to Jerusalem, and he has said to his followers that he expects to die there. 2 weeks ago, we heard about something that happened on the way to Jerusalem. We heard about a rich young man who demanded an audience with Jesus, made a big show of throwing himself in front of Jesus. And that man said that he'd always done the right thing. And it seems like he was expecting praise from Jesus, expecting him to say, "Congratulations, you're perfect, you've made it." But instead, Jesus challenged him not to do better, but to do something different, to give up all his wealth and follow him, to do what he's challenged the other disciples to do. It seems like this rich young man, who never gets named, goes away sad instead of following. And we don't hear of him again. Today we have another story of somebody wanting Jesus' attention and making a big embarrassing scene to make sure that he's heard. And with this man, we are given a name. His name is Bartimaeus. That's a name that means son of Timaeus, or son of honor. And we know who his father is. His father is Timaeus. What this suggests to us is that he was somebody who the people hearing this story would have been familiar with, and they could have identified him. They're hearing a story about somebody from their community. This isn't someone who just disappears after his encounter with Jesus. He's in a public place on the street so that he can ask people for money as they're passing him, because he probably wouldn't have had any opportunity for employment. His blindness puts some limitations on his ability to approach Jesus for himself. But that doesn't stop him yelling out to Jesus when he finds out that Jesus is nearby. Being blind doesn't stop him from speaking up for himself and asking for attention. But there's another challenge that isn't created by his disability. It's created by the attitudes of the other people around him. The crowd is trying to stop him from getting help. Maybe they prefer him to stay in his place, where he is dependent on their charity and they can feel good about giving him some coins every now and then. Or maybe they just find him annoying, always asking for money, and so they just hate the sound of his voice. Maybe they wish that he'd be polite and respectful and not embarrass them when an important visitor is in town. Even though the crowd tries to stop him from seeing Jesus, Bartimaeus makes himself heard. Even though the crowd are trying to stop Bartimaeus from being seen and heard, he makes sure that he gets what he needs. When Jesus saw this man, he could have made some assumptions about what the man wanted. It's easy for us to assume that we know what's best for somebody else, especially if we can do things that they can't with our power or with our knowledge or with our money or influence. But assuming that we know best can take away their power to decide for themselves. And that breaks people's spirits. It breaks people's spirits when there's somebody else who has the power to intervene and interfere in their lives, whether they like it or not. I've heard from folks who are blind how it feels when a stranger assumes that they need help crossing the road and grabs them by the arm. It could be annoying, but it could be downright unsafe. Jesus doesn't assume that he knows what Bartimaeus needs or that he knows best. He asks Bartimaeus about what he wants. He trusts Bartimaeus with that decision. Bartimaeus has made himself seen by Jesus even though others have tried to prevent that. And now he also articulates that he wants to be able to see. Jesus tells him that his faith has made him well and sends him away. Instead of challenging Bartimaeus to follow him, like he said to the rich young man earlier, he tells Bartimaeus to go off on his own way and be free. He's free to do what he wants. But that isn't what Bartimaeus does. Instead, Bartimaeus follows Jesus on his way to Jerusalem, right as we're getting to the very dangerous part of Jesus' story. This happens just after a whole lot about other people not understanding Jesus, not being able to see who Jesus is. Bartimaeus can actually recognize a lot more about Jesus than many of the sighted folks who have come before him. Peter has refused to listen to Jesus when Jesus has said that he is going to die. The rich young man wished to be praised for being good, but didn't want to give up everything to follow Jesus. The disciples have fought among themselves about who will be the second in command, who will be the greatest. Bartimaeus can't see the whole picture yet. When he calls Jesus son of David, it probably means that he thinks Jesus is heading to Jerusalem to capture the city like David did. He's probably assuming that Jesus is a man of war like David was. But Bartimaeus acts on what he does see about Jesus and he follows Jesus. In Jerusalem, he's going to see more and he will recognize more clearly who Jesus really is. Bartimaeus is being shown to us as an example of what it is to be a disciple. Let's be encouraged by the example of Bartimaeus. He sees who Jesus is. He calls out to Jesus for help. He follows Jesus on the way with the understanding that he has.